You may have heard some recent news clips or press releases talking about how a certain compound in vegetables like celery, and sometimes they'll say broccoli, might actually help reduce your gray hair. Now, before you start eating obscene amounts of celery or parsley or rubbing the juice on your scalp, let's take a look at the actual study that these press releases and news media outlets were talking about. So a study recently came out, and it basically took mice, not a whole lot of them, about 5 mice per group, and it looked at this compound that's found in high amounts in things like celery or parsley and a variety of different vegetables. It's called luteolin. It's a flavonoid. Now what they did is they took genetically modified mice that got gray hair faster. And over the course of 16 weeks, they either fed them this luteolin or they rubbed a luteolin alcohol, 70% alcohol compound onto they shaved part of the back and they put it directly on the skin for 16 weeks. Both treatments, both topical and internal, orally, improved their ability to gray. They didn't gray as much. In fact, the researchers said they retained their black hair and they were supposed to get gray, suggesting that higher amounts of this flavonoid found in some vegetables, luteolin, might actually inhibit graying. Now, but again, before you start getting excited about this, there's a whole bunch of problems with this paper and its implications towards humans that we have to talk about. Number one is the dose. Now, the dose that was given to the mice orally was 0.5 milligrams per gram of body weight. Now, they only weigh grams, so if you translate that into kilograms, that's about 500 milligrams per kilogram of body weight per day. Now, if you do the calculations to extrapolate that in towards humans, in the mythical 70 kilogram, 150 pound person, that's about 2.8 grams or 2,800 or 2,800 milligrams of luteolin a day. Now, the problem with that is that's a lot of luteolin. Most studies haven't even come close to using that amount in humans. Nor if you look at capsules or bottles or formulas that might have luteolin in them, not so fast, don't start buying them yet, have minuscule amounts compared to, like, again, 2.8 grams. And if you're heavier, it would be even more. So in the neighborhood of maybe 3 grams of luteolin a day. So just to put that into comparison, let's say you take celery, which has the highest amount of luteolin compared to other vegetables, relatively speaking, might have about 10 milligrams of luteolin per 100 grams of celery. So if you do the math on that, that might be about 66 pounds of celery a day just to get that roughly 3 grams of luteolin. So that doesn't really make a lot of sense. Also, there was a paper that was done on diabetics that was looking at how much luteolin they were eating in the diet and comparing that to mortality and cardiovascular mortality risk. And what they found was the higher the luteolin consumed in the diet in the form of vegetables, the less likely someone was, it reduced the risk of all-cause mortality as well as cardiovascular mortality by about 22%, if I remember correctly. But the amount of luteolin in the diet of the people that ate the most was only about 10 milligrams a day, not even close to a gram, much less 3 grams, just minuscule. The second big problem with this study was the species, genetically modified single-strain mice, comparing that to genetically extremely diverse human beings, as well as the timeline. So remember, this study was about 16 weeks, and they used genetically modified mice, mutant mice, that grayed faster than they were supposed to in order to be able to induce graying and see if this treatment actually worked. Now, if we were to put this in human terms, if the lifespan of a mouse is a couple of years, 16 weeks is about, let's say, 15% of their lifespan. Now, if you were to say the average human might live around 80 years, 15% of their lifespan is about 12 years. So imagine taking a young kid and for 12 years giving them the equivalent dose of luteolin, which would, in a smaller child might be in the range of around 1 gram a day for 12 years. And by the way, they're supposed to be gray, by the time they're age 13 or 14. Or rubbing a 70% alcohol solution on their bald scalp where they might be graying. Now, 70% alcohol solution with 1% luteolin in it is not a good idea for 12 years. That's going to totally thrash your scalp. So therefore, extrapolating this 16-week study on mice using either an oral amount, a very high amount, or a topical dose using a 70% alcohol solution over the course of 12 years for a human in a genetically diverse population of adults, it's not going to extrapolate very well. Now, the third problem of this is that, believe it or not, mice and humans have different hair growth cycles. Number one, mice have what's called synchronous hair growth. All their hair basically grows at the same time, at the same rate. And as you know from brushing your hair, you might lose some of your hair. You have some little baby hairs that are growing and some long hairs. It's called asynchronous. So our hair doesn't even grow the same in the first place. And here's a paper that actually says the differences in our hair. The hair cycle in humans also differs from that in mice. Human scalp hair follicles largely exist in the anagen phase, which lasts several years and is comparatively longer than the telogen, typically 2 to 3 months, becoming progressively longer with age. In contrast, mouse dorsal hair follicles on their back largely reside in the telogen phase, which lasts for months, rather than anagen, which is only 2 or 3 weeks long. You can see that the hair growth and how it happens in mice is almost completely opposite of how it happens in humans. So that's a huge problem with this study too. The last big problem with this is what you can call the pharmacokinetics or bioavailability of luteolin. Now, luteolin as a flavonoid has very poor bioavailability in humans. Supposedly around 10% of oral luteolin ingested actually gets absorbed. Is that different in mice versus humans? Number one. Number two is, in that study, the topical solution of luteolin seemed to perform a little bit better with the mice than did the oral luteolin. Now, maybe that means we can rub that on our scalp. However, again, they used a 70% alcohol solution on their scalp, which on their bear scalp, by the way, they had to shave their backs first before applying this for 16 weeks. We would have to do this. The equivalent, again, would be a 70% alcohol solution of 1% luteolin on our bear scalp for a course of about 12 years to maybe then therefore prevent graying, which doesn't even really make a whole lot of sense. So here's a paper that was published a couple years ago that's entitled Luteolin Supplements, All That Glitters Is Not Gold. And some direct quotes from this is, the total amount of flavonoids combined should not exceed 1.5 grams per day, which is far less than the almost double amount, depending on your body weight, that the implications of this study recommends. Especially in those who are slow metabolizers, somebody that their liver doesn't metabolize certain compounds as fact, because they may inhibit liver metabolic enzymes when they reach micromolar concentrations in the serum. This particular sentence was quoting a study that was looking, it was an in vitro study, which means it's in a petri dish, not in people, but looking at inhibition of liver enzymes as it pertains to things like acetaminophen, Tylenol, and things that would potentially block that, including luteolin. This paper goes on to say, an additional problem with available supplements containing flavonoids in powder form, which is how some people sell luteolin, is their poor absorption, at less than 10% from the intestine. They go on to say, as a note that was found below a table presented in this paper, any product of 60 capsules claiming 100 milligrams of luteolin per capsule and price less than $35 is unlikely to contain high purity luteolin, which is very expensive. The paper went on to say that, moreover, giving higher amounts of flavonoids will accumulate in the intestine and inhibit the gut microbiome. So what do you think? Should we start rubbing luteolin all over us in order to prevent gray hair, or start consuming it in ridiculously large amounts? I'm going to say no. I don't think that that's a great idea. This is one study done on mice, very limited, small cohort, short time period. The carryover is minimal at best. Should we be eating vegetables high in luteolin? Absolutely, but I think we should leave it at that. If you like this kind of information, head over to metabolicfitnesspro.com, where we have these kind of conversations with functional, nutritional, and integrative medical practitioners in order to help them be more successful at what they do.